We are in Parashat Vayechi this morning. We are in the closing of the story of Yosef, this novella about Yosef. We have Yaakov blessing his children at the end of chapter, at the end of chapter 49. We're going to begin right at the end of that blessing. And so we're going to start at Genesis 49, verse 28. But first I want to review a little bit about where we've been. So last week Joseph came out, right, Bert? Right? So if you were here last week, Yosef comes out to his brothers, but he puts them through a series of tests before he does that, before he's willing to be vulnerable and let them know who he is exactly behind his Egyptian voice and language and customs and costume and makeup and hair. He is completely assimilated. He's not only assimilated, he is the second highest authority in Egypt. He is completely Egyptian in all ways that would seem to matter. He has a great deal of wealth and a great deal of power, a great deal of influence, and complete control over his brothers' fates. He tests them to see if they've changed since the days when he knew them, and because we'll recall that wasn't a very pleasant experience for Joseph, right? How his brothers treated him, and so he's not going to make himself vulnerable, and he's not going to expose himself to them and come out to them until he sees that they have changed. So he sees that, and they have this lovely reunion. They bring their elderly father, Jacob, down from Canaan, where there's a famine, right, where Joseph can take care of them all. And they're going to settle in the land of Goshen, the northern part of Egypt, where, again, the crops are not influenced by rain. They are influenced by
floods.
The Nile flooding, right? Irrigation happens from the Nile overflowing its banks. So very often, like we said, in the ancient world, when there's a famine in Canaan, Mesopotamia, Egypt, that northern part of Egypt had food because of the Nile. So they are going to settle there, and everything seems to be going swimmingly. Yosef has not seen his father since he was a youth, right? Since he was sold into slavery, he's not seen his father. So we're not in that part of the triennial reading, but you can imagine the scene when he thinks he'll never see his father again. His father assumes he's never going to see his son again. And there's this incredible reunion between them. So Torah, as usual, is very terse, it's very compact, and it doesn't really care about all the intervening years. There's this lovely reunion, and now we get Jacob on his deathbed, right? So Torah's not interested in the day-to-day life and what people feel and what they experience and how they grow, right? That is simply not the interest of the biblical authors. So we just had the reunion between Yosef and Yaakov, and now Yaakov's on his deathbed, right? So many years later, he's going to bless his sons, as we've seen happen over and over and over again in Torah. When it's time to die, it is time to give a deathbed blessing to those who will carry on. The texts that we have surrounding this process of blessing is a compilation of different tribal traditions. It is not a unified whole. It's not what we're going to be looking at. But we're going to come right at the end of that. If you look at 49:27, the last to be blessed is Binyamin. Why? He's the baby. He's the baby of the family. And it's organized in an interesting way with the children of the different matriarchs.
Do we know how old Benjamin is at this point?
I don't know that we do. We could do the math. But does someone have a page number?
291. The green one's 291.
291 in the green. So Jacob is 110. So I don't know how old that makes Binyamin. We'd have to figure out how old Yaakov was when Binyamin was born and Rachel died, because she dies, of course, in childbirth. Okay, so we are coming to the end where Binyamin is being blessed as a ravenous wolf. exactly how I think about blessing our children today, right? In the morning he consumes the foe, and in the evening he divides the spoil. So lovely tradition that we have. So if someone would like to begin reading at 28.
And that's a blessing.
Wasn't it
Right, you don't want to hear what he said when he was mad at him.
Isn't that talking about the tribe and not the person? Really? Maybe.
So always there are two parallel tracks. Always. When we're talking about the sons of Yaakov, we are always talking about the tribes. We are always talking about the tribes who retroject their ancestry onto mythic brothers, right? But yes, this was always a loose confederation of tribes. They come together in an alliance, and once that starts to become a nation state, they write the national history, and they make their progenitors brothers. So it's retrojected back to a fictional, stay with me more, to a mythic time in our, Maura's leaving now. We've had many discussions about historicity, and does it have to be factual to be true? And Maura and I come on different sides of that discussion. So let's look at 28. So yes and yes, Bert.
All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and thus did their father speak to them as he blessed them, blessing each one with a blessing that befit him. And he gave them a charge, saying, when I am gathered to my people, bury me with my ancestors in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as an inalienable gravesite. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah, and they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and the cave in it was from the Hittites. When Jacob was done, charging his son, he drew his feet into the bed. He then breathed his last and was gathered to his people.
So we're getting the epilogue, right, of the Yaakov story here. So they were 12 in number, and Yaakov has now blessed each of them. And then he instructs them, right, saying, I'm about to be gathered to my kin. This is the euphemism for I'm about to die. And I want to be buried where? With my family, with my ancestors, right? In the cave of Machpelah, where we are told in this very literary tying up the loose ends way, that the cave which is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre in the land of Canaan. The field that Avraham bought from Ephron for a burial site, where Avraham and Sarah are buried, Yitzchak and Rivka, and where I buried Leah. Where's Rachel? Where's Rachel?
Wasn't she buried by the side of the road?
By Bethlehem, right? Where she died. They weren't going to carry the body all the way to the cave of Machpelah. You're talking about a climate where you can't do that.
Well, but Jacob wants to be carried there.
Bones. Secondary burial. Right? So in the ancient world, you had ossuaries. There was always secondary burial. You had the primary burial, and then a year later, you would go collect the bones after the flesh had rotted off, and then you would take the bones, put them in an ossuary, and you'd bury the bone box, the ossuary, in a family plot. So often there were, if you think of a cave, there were slots in the cave for bodies, and then in the center was where you would bury the ossuary. So that lots of people could be in different stages of decomposition, essentially, and then you would put the bones in the ossuary for secondary burial. For me, it's very powerful that I feel like we still have a remnant of that process in what ritual?
A year later,
the unveiling, the setting of the stone. We still go back a year later and do something more permanent, after a year. It's, for me, very powerful that we've been doing this for 3,000 years. I don't know that it's derivative. I mean, the unveiling is something that comes from Europe. It's a custom that comes from modern Europe. But I think as a people, we have this impulse, right, that we need to go back after that first year, because the firsts are always the hardest. The first birthday, the first, holiday, the first Rosh Hashanah, the first everything is the hardest. And something's different after those firsts. Once you've come through those firsts, there's something different about the rest of your life in mourning for that person. And so I think it's for me, it's very moving that we, 3,000 years later, are still going back a year later. And
I'm not familiar with the word ossuary. Is it like a coffin?
Mm-hmm. It's like a box.
Small box.
It's a smaller box into which the bones, everything that doesn't decompose, would have gone in that box. We found many. So he wants to be buried with his ancestors, and so he, again, something I think that we still as human beings, right, have an impulse, even though we know we're not going to be there exactly. We want to be in the family plot, right? We want to be together with the family. And Yaakov finishes his instructions. He draws his feet into the bed and was gathered to his people. So he dies. Somebody want to read at 50?
Joseph threw himself upon his father. He wept over him and kissed him. Joseph then charged his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. When his 40 days were completed, for it took the embalmers that many days, Egypt bewailed him 70 days. The days of bewailing him passed, and Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household, saying, "If I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh and say, 'My father adjured me, saying, see, I am about to die, and my grave that I have acquired for myself in the land of Canaan, there must you bury me. Now, then give me leave to go up and bury my father. Then I will come back.' Pharaoh said, 'Go up and bury your father as he adjured you.'" Joseph.
Okay, let's stop here.
Question.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why in 50 is it the physicians to embalm his father? So the physicians embalmed Israel. Why did they change from Jacob to Israel in that list?
So let's look at it. So Yosef is overcome, right, with emotion. Vayipol Yosef al pnei aviv, and Yosef fell on the face of his father. This is a unique expression in Torah. We don't see it anywhere else. Sometimes you will see someone falling on the neck of someone else, but that's when you're both upright. So that when you fall on the neck of somebody, you are embracing. So we don't see this anywhere else in Torah, this gesture of falling on someone's face, but we can imagine that he's overcome with grief at his father's death. For me, it's a poignant moment. I don't think, for me, Yosef is just grieving his father's death. I think he's grieving everything that was lost. All of those years. All of those years that he didn't have his father, that he didn't know his father, that his father mourned for him, right? And so for me, like this grief is profound for Yosef, who's made it. Yosef is completely successful. He's completely made it. And yet there's this huge part of him missing, experience of his life that's missing, that he can't get back. And he weeps. Yosef is somebody who feels very deeply. Remember, he has to leave the room when his brothers are there because he's so overcome with emotion at seeing Benjamin that he has to leave and go weep in the other room and then wash his face. He's someone who feels deeply. And so Yosef orders them to embalm his father. Yosef himself will be embalmed. Right? So again, this is, when you're dealing with that kind of climate, one of the ways you preserve the body is you embalm the body. Clearly, this is not a religious ritual for Yaakov or for Yosef. This is very different from the Egyptian understanding of embalming, which would have been part of their rituals around entering into, what comes next, and the cult of Osiris.
But isn't that partially Joseph's assimilation?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I think so. The dignified way to deal with the body in Egyptian tradition would be to embalm. You don't let it rot, God forbid. Right? That's just, ew. Like, you embalm. And preserve the body. So whenever we talk these days about we don't embalm, we don't embalm, we don't embalm, we don't embalm. Right? So it's, yes, that's true. We don't. And it's not always been, the same reaction Jewishly to embalming that we have today, right? It was fine for Yaakov and Yosef.
Was Jacob the first of the fathers to be embalmed?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, we tend to think these things go all the way back to biblical texts. They often do not, right? They're often rabbinic in their origin. Things like, we don't embalm. So he has the physicians because he's got the ability to hire only the best, right, for his father. And the Egyptians themselves mourn publicly for Yaakov for 70 days. So we're not sure if the 40 days that is referenced and the 70 days are concurrent, or if they're, what do you call it?
Consecutive.
Consecutive. Thank you.
It looks consecutive.
The 40 days is interesting. It's an interesting number.
Right? It's an interesting number. It's not what we're used to seeing, right? But we do have records from the ancient world, from Herodotus, that says that the body was placed in niter, N-I-T-E-R, for 70 days. So it's possible that this is actually part of the process of embalming. And so while that's happening, they're still mourning. Because it's not done,
When I read it, it looks like it says it took them 40 days to embalm it, and then they bewailed him an additional 70. That's kind of what it reads like. So,
so
it's possible.
Yep. So we're not exactly sure. But there's also a process of 30 days of dressing the corpse with spices and oils. Right? So there are all these different ways of going about embalming, and some of them are long in terms of their process. And of course, our tradition understands it as there was a period of time that it took for embalming, and then 30 days would have been the normative, and remains normative for us about that initial period of mourning. And we have that for Aharon, right? In the Torah, we have that Aharon is mourned for 30 days. So it seems that the origin of 30 days is biblical and is still normative for us. So the question becomes, what is this about? He's called Yaakov, he's called Yisrael. So Yaakov experiences the name change when he wrestles with whatever it is that he understands it to be that he's wrestling with, and comes away from that encounter limping. His name is changed from Yaakov to Yisrael, the one who wrestles, one who struggles with God. Because somehow that's how our tradition understands that encounter. The rabbis talk often about when is he called Yaakov and when is he called Yisrael. Is he called Yaakov when he is embodying the usurper, the trickster, the clever Yaakov who manipulates everybody and manipulates everything? And then he's called Yisrael when he's living into more of his patriarchal role as the ancestor. It doesn't match up so easily. But Rabbi Shefa Gold, which we're going to talk about later, those of you who are with me later, Rabbi Shefa Gold has a lovely interpretation, which is sometimes we're Yisrael and sometimes we're Yaakov. That there are parts of us we don't leave behind. There are ways that we continually, act true to who we are, who our unique and quirky nature is. Not always the best of us, but it's who we are. And there are other times we're able to kind of transcend that and live into who we want to be and what our greater values are and what we would want to leave behind as a legacy, and that both are always there, and that we move back and forth between those. Torah never gives up the name Yaakov. He's referred to as both. That somehow in that name change, in that becoming something more than he was, he still carries within him Yaakov. So, I mean, that's the best I can do in terms of why he's called Yaakov and why he's called Yisrael, because Torah doesn't leave the Yaakov part behind in referring to him as Yisrael. But we are, interestingly enough, B'nai Yisrael. We could have been a lot of things. We could have been B'nai Avraham. We could have been B'nai Yitzchak, right? B'nai Yaakov. And we're not. We're B'nai Yisrael.
I have a question about the relationship between Israel and Egypt. What is that? What do contemporary rabbis, how do they view that connection? Because I don't know if there's scientific proof that we built the pyramids or things like that.
Maura, do you want to take that one?
Some harmony going on here, which is interesting.
So always when we look at Torah texts regarding like ancestors dealing with other peoples or other tribes or other countries, it's always reflective of a time in Israel's history and relationships between the nation of Israel and her neighbors. So you're right. There's clearly times where ancient Israel had a positive relationship with Egypt. That is absolutely true. We know this from the record that when there was famine in Canaan, people often went down to become migrant workers in Egypt. However, having said that, Egypt is always down there. It's always down. It's always a decline in terms of spiritual purity. I mean, not that they would have used that word in ancient Israel, but like cultic purity. It was understood to be wealthy and degraded in that way, right? They were. It's what I think of when I think of Rome. Often, like that they were incredibly wealthy and therefore seen by certain people like the ancient Israelites as being decadent and self-indulgent, and the wealth of Egypt, the power of Egypt was exactly how we understand the United States in the world today. Right? They were the dominant power in that part of the world. Mesopotamia was the other power. So it was Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Israel in the middle. And this was here's the ocean, 'cause for me, here's the ocean, here's Mesopotamia, here's Egypt, here's Israel. It's also a spice route, a trading route. So it's both on the coast, so you got shipping issues, and it's a north-south trade route between Mesopotamia and Egypt. There was always competition between Egypt and Mesopotamia, which meant Israel was constantly being overrun, constantly smished in the goings on between Mesopotamia and Egypt, constantly. So I think there was always also and always threatened from the sea because of the coast. So ancient Israel was always caught between the superpowers of the day. And so I can't help but believe there's also some serious resentment, right, about the control Egypt had over the region and its resources and what happened. Life was very unstable in that part of the world. Remains unstable in that part of the world. It's not a wonder to me that it's unstable. People go, how come they can't it's never been stable. It's always been earthquakes, famine, all the things that can happen, war, all of it kept the populations moving around and competing for resources all the time. So there's always this love-hate with Egypt. Always. And so you hear at the end of our story that Yosef makes it very clear, take my bones out of here when you go. Right, so take them. I don't want to be like it. The text makes it very clear, I don't want to stay here, forever. So it's just very...
But the relationship at this point seems to be quite good because Pharaoh is being very nice. He lets them live there. Joseph says,
That's
can
right.
I have like a sabbatical and go to bury my father, get some time off? And
That's right.
Pharaoh says, sure.
That's right. And what does it lead to? What is all that being lovely to us and letting us stay and incorporating us? What does it lead to?
Well, we got very numerous, and then there was a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph.
And that led to...
slavery.
So be very careful. Be very careful. Egypt will let you in. You can check out anytime you like, but you can't never leave. They will let you in, and they'll be very nice to you. Be very careful. Be very suspicious. Don't let your guard down, right? And because someone will arise who did not know Joseph. Always. And you know that place down there. Right? Be very, very careful. So yes, there was times there was good relationships, always suspicion, and our people are hanging out down there, but are going to be enslaved for 400 years, right? This is the way the story of the Exodus is set up. This is how we get there, is this. But definitely reflects, periods where there was good relationships. All right. Where are we? I have
50.
Lost our place.
50.
50?
I mean,
Yes.
50,
7, I'm sorry.
50
7.
verse 7, right?
7.
So Pharaoh says, okay, go, y'all. And so verse 7, what happens?
Joseph goes.
Somebody want to read?
Joseph then went up to bury his father. With him went all Pharaoh's officials, the eldest of the palace, and all the other elders of Egypt, and all Joseph's household, and his brother and his father's household. They left in Goshen only their little ones, their flocks, and their cattle. And with him went the chariots and the charioteers, so the camp was very numerous. When they reached Goren ha-Atad, on the other side of the Jordan, they held there a great and solemn lamentation. He observed a mourning ceremony of 7 days for his father. When the land's inhabitants, the Canaanites, saw the mourning ceremony at Goren ha-Atad, they said, "This is a solemn mourning for Egypt." And they called the place Abel Mitzrayim. It is on the other side of Jordan. Thus his sons did for Jacob exactly as he had commanded them. His sons conveyed him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field that Abraham had bought as an inalienable gravesite from Ephron the Hittite, facing Mamre.
All right, so some scholars want to suggest that there's already an eroding of the situation in Egypt because Joseph is so quick to assure Pharaoh that he's coming back. Right? That there's already some tension, some instability in the situation right here. But either way, Joseph makes it clear that he's going to go, but he's going to come back. They leave their little ones. They have to come back. Right? We're going to see an echo of this later when Moshe says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go to worship in the desert for 3 days." And Pharaoh says, "Then leave your little ones here." Right? If you're going to go for 3 days, you don't need your kids.
And all these officials, Egyptian officials, went with them.
Exactly. All these dignitaries, all these officials, since earliest times for us, accompanying the body to its place of rest has been a central part of what it means to honor the memory of the deceased. Since this time and forward. There's a wonderful text in the Talmud that says, if you're planting a tree and the Messiah comes, finish planting the tree and then go greet the Messiah. But there's another one that says, should the Mashiach come and there's a funeral procession, you leave the Mashiach and go join the funeral procession, right? That there's, and that any time there's a funeral procession for anybody that comes by you stop what you're doing and join the procession. So meaning whether you knew the person or not. That the Hebrew word actually for funeral is livaya, accompaniment. So it's not a service. It's not prayers. The Hebrew term for funeral is livaya, that we are accompanying the dead to their place of rest. And so this remains one of our primary mourning rituals, is to accompany the body. And in places like Duluth, it was very serious for people. To go in 13 below to accompany the body to the cemetery was significant. It was a significant act of self-sacrifice, and they took it very seriously. They understood that you brave 13 below if you can, right? And often there were conversations in the foyer as we left to go to the cemetery about whether or not somebody was going to allow their mother, father, spouse, or whoever to go. It's too cold. You wait here. We'll be back. No, I have to go. So it was, I think as a people, we still really understand the importance for us of what it means to accompany the body to the burial.
Is this the first time the 7 days is mentioned? For like Shiva? Was that previously?
I think not. But I can't be. I don't know. I have to see. But I don't think so. We know from even before Israelite custom in Canaanite text, we have 7 days. But it may be the first time we see it in Torah. Let me look at my note. Saul, so we see it in Samuel, Job, and Ben Sirach. So I don't see another reference to Shiva. So this may be the case. Did I see a hand somewhere? No? Okay. So 15.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did?" So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, 'Forgive, I urge you, the offense and the guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph was in tears as he spoke to them."
So, right? You just gotta shake your head, right? So, Yaakov dies, and what's the brothers' response? Right?
They're really sorry.
They're really what?
They're really sorry they did that to him.
They're really sorry they did that to him.
They're really sorry. Yeah.
So, it's been years. They've had this wonderful reunion. They've been living together for years. Joseph's given them everything. Yaakov dies, and what happens?
No.
Families do what families do.
They're scared, I think.
There's deep fissures in this family that just are not going to be overcome, right? They're still there. There's tension, there's fissures that they cannot heal just by hanging out together in Goshen. And the minute Yaakov's gone, the anchoring force is gone, they immediately become suspicious that possibly Yosef's now going to take his revenge. And so what do? They send a message to Yosef saying, before his death, not our father. Why isn't it our father? They don't even trust playing on their brotherliness with him, right? They forfeited that when they threw him in that pit and started discussing how to kill him, right? They forfeited, Daddy, our shared daddy told us, right? Your father. So this is about, they're saying, you need to honor what your father said to us. And that is that you, Joseph, should forgive the guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Did Yaakov say this?
We don't know.
He would have said it directly to Joseph.
Possibly he would have said it directly to Joseph. Robert?
We'll never know.
We will never know. Like so many things in our family's mythic story, our mythic history, we are not told. Torah does not tell us. All we know is that the brothers are freaking out, right? And they need to somehow communicate to Yosef that Daddy would not have liked it if you killed us all.
And of course, these brothers, previously were known not to tell the truth.
Right? So once upon a time, that's true. Yosef tested them pretty harshly to see if they'd changed, and he felt they had changed. And then we see, right there, some things might have changed, and some things maybe not so much, which is the way in families, right? I don't know about you, but I've been in this business of listening, and certainly in my own life, long enough to know there are things that happen that you might move past it, but it never is the same afterwards in a family. Never. Right?
Unless someone has Alzheimer's and they don't remember.
There you go. But the person who does remember, it's not the same, right? There's ways we can forgive, and there's ways we can move past, and there's ways we can build new relationships. And there are some things that once they happen, they're not gone.
It's also interesting, Joseph doesn't seem to react to the fact that his father knew what happened.
Oh, right.
'Cause that would have been a whole other thing. Then why didn't Jacob say anything if he knew what was going on?
Why didn't he try to find him?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he wouldn't know when Jacob found out.
That's right. We don't know, and we don't know anything about if and when or how Yaakov found out.
If he did at all.
So I said if.
Right.
We don't know. All we're getting is the brothers, right? But it's interesting, it doesn't say. So we had a chat with Dad, and explained that there was an accident, right? And we weren't careful, and you fell in a pit. What did they tell him?
I once heard forgiving doesn't mean forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
But can you really forgive when you still remember? I think it's hard.
I think it's very hard.
Those brothers might also be remembering that Joseph might still be the favorite. It's not their behavior, it's the behavior. It's that Joseph has this independence of mind, dreams.
So what about him remaining the favorite would make them nervous when Yaakov dies?
His blessing. His deathbed blessing.
His
deathbed blessing.
Yosef doesn't get a deathbed blessing. Who gets the blessing for Yosef? Ephraim and Manasseh. It's his grandchildren that he blesses.
But meanwhile,
Right?
he's still the big cheese in
His
Egypt,
deathbed-
and he can still do horrible things to them.
Right, but so Dana's saying, well, maybe some of this is about the tension here is about that he's still the favorite. So what's the danger of him still being the favorite when Jacob dies?
What Jacob says in 49 when he talks about Joseph, and that he is let the blessings of your father surpass my parents' blessing, the bounty of the timeless hills, let them be on Joseph's head, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. That's on Jacob's deathbed.
Right, so he blesses all of them, but he gives the special bracha to Manasseh and Ephraim. Like Joseph's included with his, right? So he's part of it, but he gives the special bracha to Ephraim and Manasseh when he adopts them. Yes?
Jacob does?
Yes.
But I'm looking at 49, 25,
Yeah.
26 there. It looks as if that's what he's talking about, the blessings for Joseph, or different than the blessings for the other brothers. Or maybe not the blessings, but the description.
Joseph is a wild ass.
But then he goes on.
Another lovely tradition among our people to bless our children as wild
But
asses.
doesn't that continue at 26?
That'd be a great one for teenage boys.
Mm-hmm.
By the God of your father who helps you, Shaddai, who blesses you. Are those the blessings at 25 and 26 that are on Menachem and Ephraim?
No, this is where Joseph's part of the blessing of all the brothers.
Yes.
He's part of all of that. But we'll see when they get their own bracha from Yaakov. Separate from all the 12 brothers. Right. So he, in any case, I have a Devar Tzedek from American Jewish World Service, and Daniel Bloom in this article has a very powerful, makes a very powerful connection between this idea of things that happen in families not going away, and he talks about child soldiers and what they are forced to do in many places in the world, and that then when the war is over and they're not being fed, or kept by their, by the army anymore, they have to go back home. And oftentimes these children are told, kill your parents or we'll kill you. In Africa, a lot of these children are ordered to kill their parents.
Why?
Why? Do you think?
I don't know.
Why order a child to kill their parents?
To break any ties.
You don't have split
It'd be like a new
allegiances.
parent.
You don't have strong allegiances, you break any family and clan ties, and you ruin that child psychologically, and you own them. If you force a child to do something like that, you now own that child's psyche. You are in complete and utter control. You break that child as an individual. And then these kids have to go home to their clan. So it's a very powerful piece about what that means, what reconciliation looks like when it can't really ever go away, right? So how do we, when there are devastations in families that are either from within or imposed from without, how do we both recognize the horror of what's happened and yet move on? I think for us as a people, I see it a lot of times in people dealing with the Shoah, in people dealing with the Holocaust. There's in families, there's so many issues that are subterranean in families with survivors. The guilt of surviving. Sometimes I think the shame of surviving. Because it was understood by many who survived that the best of us did not make it. Right? I mean, that there's the gentlest, most generous among us perished first. They were the ones who gave their bread or their hat to somebody else, and they were shot. So there is this sense of what I had to do to survive, and how that runs through so much, not just in families, but I think in so much of our Judaism that we've inherited in some ways as a PTSD Judaism. And I think part of it is informs how we get a little crazy when we just start trying to talk about Israel, right? That we don't exactly approach the topic of Israel as rationally as we do any other discussion in the Jewish community. Even here, right? The way people get heated and get crazy about their opinions about Israel, their positions about it, I really have to believe is some kind of an existential, reaction that is completely not rational. Not that our arguments can't be rational, but the heat, with which we come at each other about them is different, and I think is part of this trauma that lives in what here is a family, but for us as a big family, some serious trauma that continues to inform how we deal with each other. So Daniel Bloom says, in some post-conflict and post-genocide communities, there's a focus on truth and justice, an effort to document wrongdoing and hold the perpetrators accountable. Although noble in intention, the process of uncovering the truth, especially when it comes to certain atrocities committed by brothers against brothers, may in fact exacerbate lingering ethnic, political, or personal hostilities. In some cases, therefore, the search for truth takes a back seat in the pursuit of reconciliation, leaving stories untold and crimes unprosecuted in the hope of allowing communities to move forward. I wonder what it would mean for us to take reconciliation and letting each other go a little more seriously, right? Like that, everybody's got to be, we got to be so right, and we got to uncover it all, and we got to, and it's I wonder if there isn't something to learn from saying, okay, can we just let it be, right? That we, and not hammer it to death, and let some things lie that we just need to let go of and move past already as a people.
I'm struck by these, Joseph's brothers, and not only did they resent him when he was the most beloved when he was young, and to the point where they wanted to kill him, he goes to Egypt and he wins again. He won his father's love. He wins. These guys are, they can't catch a break. The resentment must have been incredible.
If he goes back to his dreams, when he will lord it over his brothers, they will serve him in a way.
Mm-hmm. So the dreams come true, right?
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the next? Over here, it's a paragraph 18 to 21. Joseph, you're talking about forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And he does kind of take the high road
here.
But the reason he gives
about being God's
is that God was behind
plan.
all of this, that it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
God intended it to happen.
So this
that's
so this is our tradition's proof that Yosef has changed. That Yosef says it's not about you and me. right? It isn't about what happened to me. What happened to me was a means for all of us as a people to survive. For many, many people, including Egyptians, to survive. And so it isn't about my suffering, right? Everything that happened to me. It's about there was a grander scheme. This was meant to be so that I could fulfill this role of helping so many people, right? So does he really believe this?
Can we believe something like that?
Can we believe something like that?
That's really my question. As a progressive Jew, what do we make of that?
So
I'm suffering, but it really was for the best because God had a plan.
It's a very Jewish answer.
Does that make any sense?
It's a very Jewish answer. It's a very Jewish response to suffering.
When one door closes, another one.
Yeah.
The reason for the Holocaust was the state of Israel. I personally hate that connection, but that's, you'll hear that a lot, right? That we had to go through what we went through in order to, as a progressive Jew, obviously
it's a tough one.
It doesn't work. I mean, as a progressive Jew, for me, there's no way this theology works at all. That suffering is part of the plan in order to, because the minute I go there, I have to deal with the 7-year-old raped and left for dead in the woods, and I can't do that. There's no, if it's true in this case, then how come it's not true here? That there are child soldiers ordered to kill their parents or be killed. That's got to happen in order to.
Or Newtown.
That has to happen in order. As soon as you have a God who says in order, forget it. We're done. I'm not talking to that God. I'm done. So obviously, as a progressive Jew, this is not my theology. Does that mean there aren't times that it's comforting to think, had I not suffered what I suffered, I wouldn't be able to have empathy for people who are in that same situation or in worse situations? That certainly, where we find meaning in our own personal histories of suffering is critical to our spiritual health and growth and our contribution. To locate it in God made it happen so that, for me, doesn't work. Dana? Sorry, Robert.
I was thinking there's also a lesson for someone who profited or gained or was successful. Well, then what? And they can look at Joseph and see how he took his knowledge, his wealth, his power, and he helped, his family survive. And, there are Jews that have to do that too. That have to look beyond themselves and their success and help others.
Right. And let us be clear. Yosef helps other people. And when they can't buy food anymore, what does he tell them? Then sell Pharaoh your land. And they do. And then they don't have any land to sell. So what does he say? Sell Pharaoh your livestock for food. And they do. And then they don't have any more livestock, Torah tells us. So Yosef says to them, then sell Pharaoh your person. And they did. That is how slavery began in Egypt. So, yes, there are lots of wealthy Jews, and we hope that they give back, and we hope that they help. We hope that they don't do so in such a way that they perpetuate the very institutions that are enslaving and impoverishing other people. It is a serious issue for me right now, especially after these elections. It's like Jews, who have really, a lot of money and a lot of conservative positions that are, just in my opinion, helping to keep other people at the margins. It's a real... So yes, definitely. Yes and yes. Success, terrific. Give back, absolutely. And in a way that doesn't result... Joseph sets up what's about to happen for the next 400 years. He creates that condition of slavery. Robert, you wanted to say something?
Well, I was going back to the point you made earlier about your discomfort with God's making all this happen. I couldn't agree with you more. And I see that argument as a very slippery slope to the next. Not only did God make all this happen, but including bad things happening to good people, but by the way, those people did something that caused it to happen to them. And I for sure can't go there either.
Right. Which is a biblical worldview, right? That's biblical theology, and thank God we are an evolving religious civilization, right? That can appreciate the theology of that time and why that made sense and that was their worldview. And thank God we have evolved and at least as progressive Jews have moved past that.
I know this is off the subject, but who are the patriarchs that are supposed to be buried in the tomb near Hebron? Because when I was there, it was the windiest day of my life, and I never went to the tomb. Do you know?
You didn't go to the tomb in Hebron? Yeah. So
who is there?
So that's the cave of Machpelah that they're talking about. The tradition is Avraham, right?
Right.
That this is, so if we look back at the text, right? So that's the one that's being talked about here.
As Rachel was buried where she died, right?
Correct.
So she's not there.
Right. So Avraham, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, and Leah.
That's all?
That's a lot.
That's all? Where's Lincoln? Taft. So we're gonna wrap up here, and so Yosef tells them it's all God's plan, it's all okay, don't worry about it, and they remain together in Egypt until Yosef is 110. Yosef lived to see children of the third generation of Ephraim. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were likewise born upon Yosef's knees, right? He adopts them as his own. At length, Yosef says to his brothers, I am about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Yosef made the sons of Yisrael swear. Here we go, Bnei Yisrael, back to Anne's point about whether they are Yaakov's or Yisrael's descendants. When God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here. Right? Foreshadowing. Da, 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 da. God will take notice of you and bring... Why can't they just leave right now? Clearly, this is a gloss, right? Clearly, this is a later, right? But they could get up and leave right now.
It's a foreshadow.
Right. So it's... God will take notice of you, meaning when you are enslaved, right? And you will carry up my bones from here. He dies at 110. He was embalmed and placed in a sarcophagus in Egypt. We say together, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. May we be strong, may we be strengthened, may we be healthy enough to begin together our study of Shmot. Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. We, in our tradition, never end a book of Torah without what?
Starting the next book.
Ve'ele Shmot B'nei Yisrael Habaim Mitzrayma Et Yaakov Ish Uveito Ba'u. These are the names of the sons of Yisrael who came to Egypt with Yaakov, each coming with his household: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Yisachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of persons that were in Jacob's issue came to 70, Yosef being already in Egypt. The opening lines of the book of Exodus. We are never between books of Torah. We are never in between in our studies. We always rush to begin the next book.